Hey everyone, welcome back, or if you're just joining us, welcome to KSSP Podcast. I'm Spencer.
I'm Katie.
We're going to be talking about gluten.
All right, so what is gluten? Gluten is a structural protein. It's naturally found in certain cereal grains, although gluten often only refers to wheat proteins. In medical literature, it refers to the combination of prolamine and glutenin proteins naturally occurring in all grains that have been proved capable of triggering celiac disease. These include any species of wheat, such as common wheat, durum, spelt, corazon, emmer, and incum, barley, rye, and some cultivars, as well as any cross hybrids of these grains, such as triticale. Gluten makes up 75 to 85% of the total protein in bread wheat. So gluten can trigger adverse inflammatory, immunological, and autoimmune reactions in some people. The spectrum of gluten-related disorders includes celiac disease in 1 to 2% of the general population, non-celiac gluten sensitivity in 0.5 to 13% of the general population, as well as dermatitis, herpetoformitis, gluten ataxia, and other neurological disorders. These disorders are treated by a gluten-free diet.
And since we're talking about gluten, we're just going to briefly talk about celiac disease. Celiac disease is a chronic multiple organ autoimmune disorder, primarily affecting the small intestine, caused by the ingestion of wheat, barley, rye, oats, and derivatives that appears in genetically predisposed people of all ages. Celiac disease is not only a gastrointestinal disease because it may involve several organs and cause an extensive variety of non-gastrointestinal symptoms, and most importantly, it may be apparently asymptomatic. Many asymptomatic people become accustomed to living with a chronic bad health status as if that were normal, but they are able to recognize that they actually had symptoms related to celiac disease after starting a gluten-free diet, and improvement occurs. Untreated celiac disease may lead to malabsorption, or may cause malabsorption, reduced quality of life, iron deficiency, osteoporosis, and increased risk of intestinal lymphomas and greater mortality. Celiac disease is associated with some other autoimmune diseases such as diabetes mellitus type 1, thyroiditis, gluten ataxia, psoriasis, vitiligo, autoimmune hepatitis, dermatitis herpetiformis, primary sclerosing cholangitis, and more. Celiac disease with classic symptoms, which include gastrointestinal manifestations such as chronic diarrhea and abdominal distension, malabsorption, loss of appetite, and impaired growth, is currently the least common presentation form of the disease and affects predominantly small children, generally younger than 2 years of age. Celiac disease with non-classic symptoms is the most common clinical type and occurs in older children over 2 years old, adolescents, and adults. It is characterized by milder or even absent gastrointestinal symptoms and a wide spectrum of non-intestinal manifestations that can involve any organ of the body, and very frequently may be completely asymptomatic both in children, at least in 43% of those cases, and adults.
So with gluten and mental health, with ADHD, there is a well-established link between it and gluten intolerance or celiac disease. There's a study that found that people who had celiac disease were more likely to have ADHD, and a gluten-free diet improved their symptoms after the initial 6-month period. The association between non-celiac gluten sensitivity and ADHD isn't conclusive by any means. There's various studies that point to a connection between the two.
And then with anxiety, being on a gluten-free diet is less helpful in reducing anxiety for women with celiac disease than it is for men.
In adolescent celiac disease, patients had significantly lower tryptophan concentrations than in their blood. And we're going to discuss tryptophan when we discuss supplements, but tryptophan has been linked with mood, basically.
And then 3 months after patients started a gluten-free diet, some researchers found a significant decrease in patients' psychiatric symptoms compared to their baseline condition, coinciding with significantly decreased celiac disease activity and prolactin levels, and with significant increase in L-tyrosine, L-tryptophan, and other amino acids. In certain individuals, gluten-free diets can help the body increase levels of the precursors to make serotonin.
Now, you might be thinking that gluten sounds kind of scary right now, but there are some benefits of gluten as well. So, a study with over 100,000 participants who did not have celiac disease was conducted in 2017. The researchers did not find an association between long-term dietary gluten consumption nor a risk of heart disease. And findings also suggest that due to the potential reduced consumption of whole grains, non-celiac people avoiding gluten can possibly increase their risk of heart disease. So whole grain consumption has been linked to improving health outcomes by many studies. Significantly lowered rates of stroke and heart disease, development of type 2 diabetes, and death from all causes were all at their lowest risk when measured in groups who ate 2 to 3 servings of whole grains per day. And this was the highest intake of whole grains that was measured by these researchers. This is in comparison with the values measured in groups who ate less than 2 servings daily. This was the lowest grain intake measurement. But just keep in mind that these benefits don't always outweigh the issues caused by gluten intolerance. And basically, when you have a gluten intolerance, the body sees gluten as a toxin and attacks it, and that results in increased inflammation.
And then we're just going to briefly mention diet here too. So foods that have gluten are like whole grains, so it could be bread, pizza, pasta, processed foods, even alcohol. And then for gluten-free, there's usually like foods that are labeled that they're gluten-free. So I have a mini article here from the FDA about gluten and food labeling. So here's the section that I wanted to go over. Foods that can be labeled as gluten-free. So whether a food is manufactured to be free of gluten or by nature is free of gluten, it may bear a gluten-free labeling claim if it meets all FDA requirements for gluten-free food. Some foods and beverages, such as bottled spring water, fruits, vegetable, and eggs, are naturally gluten-free. However, because a gluten-free claim isn't required to be on a food package, it may not appear even if the food is in fact gluten-free. So gluten-free labeling, what it looks like. Regulation doesn't require manufacturers to place foods gluten-free claim in any specific location, so manufacturers may choose where they place that gluten-free claim as long as it doesn't interfere with mandatory labeling information and meets regulatory requirements. And I think they have here, so their FDA's regulation of gluten-free claims. While gluten-free is a voluntary claim that manufacturers may choose to use, FDA's gluten-free food labeling rules specifies what the claim actually means on the food label. Accordingly, manufacturers that label their foods as free of gluten are responsible for using that claim in an accurate and not misleading manner, and for complying with all requirements established by the regulation and enforced by FDA. So the rule specifies, among other criteria, that any foods that carry that label, gluten-free, no gluten, free of gluten, or without gluten, must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. This level is the lowest that can be reliably detected in foods using scientifically validated analytical methods. Other countries and international bodies use these same criteria, as most people with celiac disease can tolerate foods with very small amounts of gluten. Before the regulation was issued in 2013, there were no U.S. standards or definitions for the food industry to use in labeling products as gluten-free. This left many consumers, especially those with health concerns, unsure of whether a food was free of gluten. And then besides the limit of gluten to 20 ppm, the rule permits labeling of food gluten-free if the food does not contain an ingredient that is any type of wheat, rye, barley, or crossbreeds of these grains, an ingredient derived from these grains that has not been processed to remove gluten, or if it is an ingredient derived from these grains that has been processed to remove gluten but results in the food containing more than 20 ppm of gluten. And so for compliance, manufacturers had until August of 2014 to bring their labels into compliance. So that is passed, so that should be, I think they should all be compliant by now. And then in 2017, FDA released the results of an analysis of 702 samples from more than 250 products labeled gluten-free. Only one of those products did not comply with the labeling requirements. So it appears that for the most part, when something is labeled gluten-free, it meets FDA's requirements. So if for whatever reason you are trying out a gluten-free diet, then you should, like, those foods should be labeled so that you know what they are. And that was what we had on gluten. And as always, you can leave a comment below if you have any topic ideas that you want to hear us talk about in future episodes.
You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and we occasionally live stream on Twitch, so you can follow us there to see when we do.
And don't forget to give this video a like, as well as follow or subscribe to our other social media accounts and turn on notifications so that you get notified when our new content comes out. Otherwise, we will see you all in the next video.